take a moment to breathe. I'm going to do that. Take a glass of water. And then, yes, sir?
I'll let you take a drink.
Thank you. There's Dennis, right?
Yeah.
Excellent.
Great. I had a question around timing as it relates to the various tests, SAT, the ACT, etc. Do you have like recommended timetables or lead times in terms of like the best time to get started, how to plan from a timing perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you probably know, for those of you who might be starting the process, the test prep process logistically starts typically in your junior year. And you might meet with a college counselor maybe at the beginning of your junior year. Most college counselors recommend that you wait until toward the end of your junior year. The reason is you want to try to maximize the amount of math content that you have under your belt. That's typically the tipping point, I guess, for students. They want to make sure you kind of get through Algebra 2. Now, that does not mean, referring to what I said earlier, that the content on the test, that like they're not asking you Algebra 2 questions. But the value of having more math time is just to be more comfortable, be more confident, develop your skills, just be more prepared. In terms of preparation, the way that I prepare my students, especially for their first time out, I think of about 8 to 10 weeks. What that allows me to do is work with students. That allows us to get through 2 full practice tests. We basically meet once a week. You can do that in a shorter amount of time, but I think 2 practice tests does a couple things. One is it allows you to actually find out what your performance is. Probably the last time that students did any kind of standardized testing would have been maybe their PSAT at the middle of their fall of their junior year. It's been a while since you looked at that. And again, what I find most valuable in test prep is getting into that deeper level of understanding why you're doing what you're doing. So I think that giving yourself plenty of time to be able to prepare, not overdoing it, not 6 months of tests, but being able to do 1 practice test, look at your result, think about it carefully with someone or with yourself processing that, and then see what your progress is on the second test and be able to compare those. I think what you want out of the initial testing is you want students to have a good experience, a comfortable experience. There's what I hear from parents sometimes is, excuse me, well, we just want little Johnny to get in there and get an experience, like just get it started. And we don't care what the result is, but we just want him to have that happen and get started. Yes, but I think you also want to make sure it's a good experience, because what can happen is if little Johnny or little Jennifer has a poor experience, what you've done is you potentially set a ceiling on what they think they can do. And you don't want that. Yes, and then you.
It's always piggyback to the end of your answers. You were talking about practice tests. When do these practice tests get taken, much less the time to get the results to study for the next one? You said it's 8 to 10 weeks before you're supposed to take them.
Yeah, so both the SAT and the ACT distribute official practice tests. So this would be something a student would do on their own. I have access to many of those. I always recommend doing official practice tests as opposed to, say, Kaplan or Princeton Review or something like that. Not that those are bad companies necessarily, but there's a sophistication to official practice tests in the way that they create them that sometimes test prep companies, they get the nuance wrong. They get it's hard to quantify, but I think setting students up for success means that when they go in to or they give themselves an official practice test, meaning, they sit at the kitchen table and they do a reading section or whatever. I think it's better to have something that mimics what they're going to experience on the test as closely as possible. Does that make sense? The other point I wanted to make kind of related to that is when I always encourage my students when they're working these practice tests. I have on occasion had somebody say, "Yeah, I did the practice test last night while I was laying on my bed, and Kevin, it didn't go so well." Like, yeah, I know it didn't go so well. So you want to mimic the test conditions as well as the test content, right? So many of you, I'm sure, play sports or do other things. Like you want to practice like you're playing, right? So that goes for this too. Yes, sir.
I'm just curious in some more particulars. Oftentimes when I'm talking to my children about actually taking the test, I reference my own experience, especially with math, is the thing that I like to do when I took this test is to try to get through all of the quote easy questions. Questions that would be easy for me and make sure I know those ones, especially when you're concerned about time.
Sure.
And then go to the increasingly more difficult ones toward the end. And in my experience, I found that it's worked because I had more time to actually think of it. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really good test taking tactic. For students that are comfortable gauging whether or not a question is difficult or not, what I want my students to do is I want them to read the question, not just look at it and say, "Oh my God, that looks so hard." But if you actually engage the question, it might be way easier than you think it is. So that's one caveat. I absolutely think that it's important to work through and get, because the idea is to maximize points, right? I mean, even though I had nice things to say about being a better person and learning from yourself, it's also, you want to get a good score. Like that's part of why we're doing this. Like, let's be real. So I want to get through as much as possible and maximize the number of questions that I tackled. And I also think that coming back to questions, then I'm not wasting time beating my head against the wall trying to get a question that either A, I'm never going to get anyway, or B, maybe I'm just like, maybe it's just not making sense at the moment. And 9 times out of 10, if I circle number 8 and then I do whatever, my brain's working on it in the background. And then when I come back to number 8, like, oh, duh, I missed something about the question, or something suddenly occurred to me, like, oh yeah, I could just do boop, 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 do this, and I'm good to go. So I didn't waste the time, I got the point, and I'm not like losing steam and losing energy in the process. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to understand, so as a tutor, 8 to 10 weeks or however long you're prepping, do you spend your time working on process exclusively, assuming that the student really has covered all the material and has gotten good grades in school, they know it apparently. So is that what you focus on? Is just the process of, are you observing how they're taking the test?
Yeah, so what I would do with students is, like, let's say you did it, let's say we're working together, and I want you to come to our first session with a reading section completed, right? Because I don't want to waste time like you doing problems, that's not really helpful. So what we'll do is we look at every single question he missed, and then we'll talk about them. So I want to know then, you missed number 5, and that's why I want you to do it like as soon as, like really close to when we're going to talk, because it's in that uncovering process of saying like, maybe he's surprised that he missed it. Maybe he didn't read the answer choices. Maybe there could be a bazillion reasons why you missed that question. And I can almost guarantee you it has nothing to do with if you read like an SAT score report. Oh, they missed this question because it's the passport to algebra. It's not the path. It rarely has anything to do with it. So what I think about with my students is basically 2 categories. Content, is this a content mistake? Is there something you didn't know? Maybe you didn't know how to find the area of a triangle. Maybe you didn't know rules for a comma. So I'm going to teach those to you. Or is it an execution mistake? I didn't read the question. I didn't read the answer choices. I only read 2 of the answer choices. Something.
Do you find that the bulk of the mistakes are execution rather than
I would say
content?
80% of the student mistakes are execution. I haven't measured that, I really should, but it's at least 80%. Which is also why I think that all this angst about geometry and I don't know the stuff, it's pointless. That's not what's making you get it wrong to begin with. So why would I worry about all that? Anybody over here? They've monopolized you. What else would you like to know? Yes, ma'am.
So the official practice test, if anybody just get on any of those or?
Sure, I'll send you one. Would you like to take one? Would that be great? Yeah, so you can go to the College Board website. They're up there. ACT are a little bit like you have to dig a little bit, but happy to send those to you as well. They basically release SAT released like a whole spate of tests several years ago when they changed the format, but they're all in PDF format. The one difference kind of on the SAT, the test is the test, and then the scoring is a separate document. But on the ACT, the answers are in the same document. So don't be scared if you tried to score the SAT and you can't find the answers. In the back, sir.
It's been a couple of years since I've taken any of the tests. Have they? I've heard that they got rid of a lot more of the ones that test what you don't know rather than what you know. Have they changed, like both A and D sort of questions? Do they still have that on the test?
You would be shocked at how different it is.
Okay.
If you haven't, it's completely different. Yeah. So basically, the way the SAT goes now is it's a reading section. You have a passage and you answer questions. There's no more vocabulary. There's no. Long time ago, there used to be like antonyms and those. Nope, that's not on there. They might ask a couple of vocabulary questions, but they're vocabulary in context. So getting out those flashcards and learning new words, don't bother. That's pointless. There's an English section that's second. It's basically, there's a passage on one side and sort of questions on the other, but they're asking students to either fix the punctuation or fix something about I call them rhetorical questions, like, where does paragraph 4 belong at place 1 or place 4? Whatever, right? So moving things around or moving sentences, those kinds of things. And then 2 math sections, so a non-calculator and a calculator. And that's all. Yes?
I have 2 questions. One, do you do tutoring for the subject tests?
Absolutely.
Okay. And then 2, the next SAT is March 9th?
Yes.
Is that right?
That is right.
And it's
It's-
February
It is.
7th. And so
Yeah.
you answered the other question about the timing, and
It's
so
pretty tight.
I don't know.
So that's the ideal timing. If students need, we can accelerate that. If you chose to work with me or whoever you chose to work with, I think the issue is, excuse me, the issue is making sure that the student gets time to do the work that's required to be able to reflect on their performance and be able to learn from it. So one thing that I try to avoid and what I always caution students about is there is no point in you taking 5 practice tests, right in a row. Oh, I scored this. Well, let's see what the next one does. Let's see what the next one does. Well, it's going to do the same thing because you didn't change anything. So it's not just repetition, but also, in my view, it's repetition and reflection. I've never said it that way before. That sounded nice. Okay, that's good. I'm glad we're recording this. So it can be accelerated, but with a view to making sure that there's time in between for students to do the work, essentially. So again, like this young man, you have to do the section, and then we spend an hour talking about the section, and then there's work after the section where he needs to do some corrections and those kinds of things, in addition to, I don't know, 3 APs, soccer practice, whatever. So it just starts to become a time squeeze for the student. So from my side, I can be super flexible with that, usually, depending on my workload, but I think we just need to be mindful that the student has time to make use of that time well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know there's probably other people who just registered for the.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You are not the only one in that boat.
So,
Yeah.
back to the subject tests.
Yes.
Okay, are they structured like the SATs?
No.
I mean, that's totally.
Totally different.
concepts.
So I think, excuse me, that's a great question, because that's a common misconception. I've had students say, well, Kevin, you and I worked on the math section on the SAT, like, I'm totally ready for the subject test. No, you're not. You're not. So they get like blown out of the water because, yes, it's still SAT, it's still math questions, it's still you learning, like, engaging the test as a person and learning how to do that. But especially with the math subject tests, it's very much like that's content. Like you have to have nailed your content in addition to being a weird way to ask the content.
Okay.
So it's like doubly hard, kind of. Like, so for example, the example I gave about the easy math problem, that's legitimately, like, I'm not making that up, that's legitimately a math problem on the SAT. Like I literally have to divide by 3/4 on both sides. Woo! Not a big deal. But on the subject tests, they have to do logs, they have to analyze graphs, they have to use their calculator. Like, it's that stuff, again, plus asking things in weird ways. Does that make sense? Yes?
So can you explain what the subject test is? Is that part of SAT?
So, SAT subject tests, some schools or colleges or divisions require that students, or suggest, as part of applying to the college, that you take subject tests to demonstrate your mastery of content. So, often in engineering school, let's say you need to take the math 1 or 2 subject test, you need to take the chemistry subject test, and then maybe one other one of some kind. So they're 1-hour tests, they only deal with the content, essentially, and you can take multiple of them on a test day. So on March 9th, people are going to be taking the regular SAT, 4 hours of fun, and then other people are going to be taking subject tests where it's 1 hour of fun each time. So I think you have to check the website, but I think you can take 2. I think you can take 2 per test date. And you can just go in and choose. So let's say Saturday morning you're feeling like, hey, I'm going to do that math subject test, and I'm not feeling physics, so let me try French. While I'm here, and I've got nothing else to do, right? So I think a really good thing that you should do if you're not already working with a college counselor at school or a professional college counselor, I could recommend some people to you guys too, but that's really something that you need to be strategic about, because what starts happening is, like, you can already see, like, okay, well, March is, maybe I take the SAT in March, and then I gotta wait and take subject tests, I have to see how those go, and then maybe I decided I'm gonna apply to Elon University, and now I've got to take 3 other subject tests. Like, it starts to, you're going to run out of time, plus energy, plus money, because let's be real, this all costs, you have to pay every time, right? So I think it's really important to be strategic and thoughtful about what you're going to do, where you legitimately want to go, and what makes the most sense. Not to dissuade you, but just think about it ahead of time. Is it? Make sense? Sir?
This execution, 80%, could you explain that a bit more, what you meant?
in my work with students, so when I ask somebody to come and say, so again, let's say he's done the reading section, and we start going over it, not to pick on you, sorry, that's fine.
Big on him, yeah.
Who else? Somebody else. So let's say that a student's done a section, and they come prepared to our time together. We're going to walk through every single question that they missed. One of the most common things that I hear from students is, "Wow, I missed that." So why did you miss it, right? Because what they're describing there is they knew the material. They knew without test stress, without time stress, without emotional stress. They knew the rule for a comma. They knew a rule for a semicolon. They knew how to do the math. They knew how to read the passage. But so it wasn't the fact that they lacked some knowledge. It was some other thing over here that led to them missing the question. And that's what's been fascinating to me is, like, how do our emotions completely block out things that we normally would know, but when I look at it in the test, I'm like, don't know that. Just how do I approach the problem to be able to, process of elimination, making sure I've read the entire question. Did I understand what the question said? Did I think I know what the question said, but then, for example, like on a math test, it's really common that you'll do the math, and then, oh, I found X is 4. Well, I look at the answer choices, there's no 4. So, what were they really asking me? Well, they were asking for maybe a price, so they have to plug 4 back in. Maybe they were asking me for Y, so I have to find what that is. Maybe they were asking for, SAT loves to do this, well, X is 4, but what they really want is 2X plus 5. So you have to do all the work, find it, maybe, there's ways around that. Find X, but give them what they're actually looking for, right? So all of those things contribute to students missing questions that have nothing to do with, they know how to do algebra, they know how to find area, etc. And I think I've never asked a whole group of students this, but my sense from working with students and how they tend to progress over the course of our work is that is a revelation to them. That the idea that they essentially already know everything they need to know to be able to not just do okay on the test, like literally students that go from, I got a 510 math, to, oh my God, I got a 620 math on this practice test. Like, huge leaps because they were thoughtful about how they did the test, not just worry about like feeling inadequate and realizing that's not true. It's ridiculous. Yes?
How similar is the PSAT to the SAT score-wise?
Score-wise, the PSAT only goes up to 1560. Don't ask me why. It's some weird statistical thing that the SAT came up with. I think what you want to look for when you're looking at your scores, the easiest way to gauge how you're doing is to look at the percentiles. Because, and I think this is true of everybody, not just students, because I think scores are really hard to read. We've got all that junk on them. The way I think about it is, ultimately, you're competing against other students to get into a school. That's the whole goal, right? So, in one way, that's terrifying. But on the other hand, like, you're only competing against the people that you're going to that school for. So, when I was applying to schools, I was only competing against people that wanted to go to Purdue, the Naval Academy, University of Illinois, and I don't remember where else, because that was a long time ago. But I'm only competing against those people. So for me, that was not me personally, but like in terms of a score, that's what I need to pay attention to. If I'm applying to UC Santa Cruz, that's a different question. Or if I'm applying to, I don't know, wherever, Franklin College, don't know. right? So that's what you have to pay attention to. Like, how am I doing relative to the people that I'm going to be competing with? That's what's important. So for people who say, I want to go to MIT, Stanford, Harvard, whatever, that's a different conversation that we're going to have about the work and effort that you need to put in. Because let's be real, that's going to take some work and effort. Like, I'm going to push you differently if you tell me I want to go to Stanford than I want to go be to the Krannert School or I want to go to Kelly School of Business. Not that one's bad or good or whatever, it's just the fact. And it has to reflect you. Does that make sense? So, you know, let's go to SCAD. That'd be great. That's it. But that's, you know, we'll go to design school. Then we're going to do something different than if we're doing something else. But it needs to match where we're going, not just have this. It's just not a general dream, right? You don't have to compete with everybody. Just figure out where you're going. Ish. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question? I know I got it. Yes.
So a generation ago, it was the SAT, and there was this thing called the ACT that
Yep.
came on the scene.
Yep.
Now it seems to almost have reversed,
It is reversed.
and
As of, I think, 2015, more people were taking the ACT than were taking the SAT.
so while more people are taking it, what really is more important to take? Because you go back to, you're driving SAT test, subject matter test, and then of course you add the ACT to it.
Yep.
Now you're really running out of time. So
Yep.
what really should be the more important one to worry about?
In my mind, the more important one is the one that your student feels more comfortable with.
How would we know that?
Take 2 tests. So they'll already have had an SAT experience by taking the PSAT, have a decent idea of what's going on there. Just get it. There's a pre-ACT that some schools give. That might be part of their plan. Maybe not a lot do. But like literally, I can give you a PDF of an ACT. They can take it and just feel like, okay, which one I think essentially does your student feel like they can maximize their score? And for every student, that feel I think is different. What most college counselors I work with recommend in terms of the timing issue is, so they've taken the PSAT. In the spring of their junior year, they recommend taking an official SAT, take an official ACT, really sit for it, and then compare the scores, how you actually did, and decide which test you want to go for. Which one do you really want to maximize? The advantage now is, just like I completely agree with what you said. A generation ago, you could take the SAT. I don't know what this ACT thing is, or if I want to get into Michigan, I can take the ACT. But now you have a choice, and the tests are different enough that it kind of allows students to decide which one works better for them. In terms of, from my side, in terms of format, the formats are essentially the same, except for math is all one section in the ACT, and the ACT adds a science section. So, for my purposes, there's not much change in how we process that. But for some students, and back to your question about like scores, maybe it turns out they get an 80th percentile, essentially, on both tests. Great, which one do you feel better about? Or maybe they get an 80th percentile on one test, but they get a 92 percentile on the other test. Well, I'm going with the one they got a 92 percentile on, because we're already ahead. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
So, kind of a two-part question. Is the preparation, does it need to be completely different for the test, or is it the same? And then of the different types of preparation, the courses, the tutor doing it, and you may have others doing it at home with your own studying books. What do you recommend? And sort of what's the time commitment
That's really hard. I think students get, I mean selfishly, the quality of the tutor matters. How do I answer that? I think in a lot of ways it depends on the student. And obviously, as we've already talked about, it also really depends on time and resources. So I think generally students are going to get a lot more out of working with someone who's going to, A, create a really, really good relationship with them, and B, who's going to push them to think differently than they're going to think on their own. So that could be a class. I think there's some really good classes out there. I think private tutors vary widely. But there's certainly other good ones out there that aren't just me. But I think too, and then also, I think a lot of folks feel like, well, I could really do this on my own, right? I could. By the way, I just remembered something. The SAT, the official SAT study guide, which is like a blue book. That's literally the same official practice test that they have online in PDF form. Some people like that because it's all together and they're not papers flying everywhere. And then the red book, the real ACT guide, is the one put out by the ACT that has official practice tests for those as well. So for some students who are motivated, they can do the work themselves. And I'm happy to, if your student says, hey, I want to do the work, I had a student ask me 2 days ago, I want to do the work myself. Great. Give me a call. I will tell you what to do. I'll give you a whole plan. We'll talk about do this, do this, do this, do this. I'll tell you what questions you should ask yourself. I'll tell you what to write about. Go for it. I think that'd be awesome. I think students often don't have time, nor do they have the motivation that they think they have. So often I've heard from parents that, yes, little Johnny could do it on his own, but he really needs to meet with you on Thursday because then he has to get it done. So there's that too.
What is the time commitment that you should budget for preparing for the tests?
I would say working out, I would say starting 8 to 10 weeks ahead of time. I would also say maybe an hour, hour and a half a week for their own work and processing, depending on each section is a little bit different timing, so some of them take less time than others. But that would be a ballpark.
Thank you for
Good.
your time.
Oh, of course.
It's like, it's 8:05, so I want you guys to be able to get out in a decent amount of time.
Thank you for checking the time. I
Yeah.
have nothing on you.
And so, thank you for your time. Thank you guys for coming out. And we have snacks you can still grab. There's also attendance business cards on the table, and I'm sure you're going to be around.
Yeah, I'll be around if you want to
Still
interact.
ask questions.
That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks.